The sea was gray the morning Jay found the thing on the beach. It matched the color of his thoughts. For months, since Unji had gone, every day seemed painted in shades of gray. He walked the rocky shore below his house in Busan out of habit, not hope. The salt air did nothing to clear the heaviness in his chest. He walked with his head down, watching his boots crush the wet sand. The fog was thick, swallowing the sounds of the distant port. He almost missed it, a glint, not of shell or glass, but of something smoother. He stopped. It was a pod, roughly the size of a small car, half buried where the high tide had left it. It was made of a material he had never seen, dull silver, like brushed metal, but without a single seam or hinge. It felt cold to the touch, a deep cold that seemed to push against his skin. It was utterly silent. Jay, a marine biologist by training, felt a flicker of old curiosity. This was not driftwood or fishing debris. He walked around it, looking for markings, a hatch, anything. There was nothing. He placed his palm flat against the surface. With a soft, sighing sound, a circular section of the pod simply flowed away, like ink retracting into water. An opening appeared. Cold, thin air whispered out. Inside it was dark. He pulled out his phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut into the darkness. A woman was inside. She was curled on her side, her back to him. She wore a simple suit of gray fabric that seemed part of the pod itself. Her hair was short and a pale, shimmering silver. Strange, glowing bands of faint blue light wrapped around her wrists and ankles, binding her. They pulsed slowly, like a tired heartbeat. Jay's breath caught. A castaway? Some kind of experiment? The thoughts were stupid, and he knew it. This was something else. He reached in, his hand shaking. "Hello? Can you hear me?" he said in Korean. At the sound of his voice, she stirred. The movement was weak. She began to turn, a slow and painful roll onto her back. The light from his phone fell on her face. She was alien, yet she was not. Her features were human-like, but perfected in a way that seemed unreal. Her skin was pale, almost luminous, and her eyes, when they opened, they were not human eyes. They held tiny, shifting points of light, like stars seen through a telescope. They were deep and ancient and full of pain. Those eyes found his. For a long moment they just stared. Jay was frozen, lost in that impossible gaze. Then, a change came over her face. The pain and fear did not vanish, but they were joined by something else. A profound, earth-shattering relief. It was the look of someone lost in a desert who has finally seen another person. It was a recognition so total and complete that it left no room for doubt. Her lips, dry and cracked, parted. She took a ragged breath, and her voice, though weak and strained, was clear. It was spoken in perfect, if strangely accented, Korean. The words were soft, but they hit Jay like a physical blow. "You finally returned." A tear escaped from her star-filled eye and traced a path through the dust on her cheek. Then, as if the effort of speaking those 4 words had used the last of her strength, the light in her eyes dimmed. Her body went limp, her head lolling to the side. The faint glow of her binders pulsed once, weakly, and went out. Jay stood there, phone light trembling. The fog curled around him, isolating this small scene from the rest of the world. The words echoed in his mind. "You finally returned." He had never seen this being before in his life. He was just Jay, a grieving man on a lonely beach. He was no one's savior. He was no one's long-awaited return. But she had looked at him as if he was. His scientific mind screamed at him to run, to call the police, to report this to the authorities. This was a national security event. This was world-changing. But the man who had just spent months watching someone he loved fade away saw something else. He saw a creature, bound and abandoned, dying alone in the cold. He saw the utter trust in her eyes before they closed. He heard the devastating relief in her voice. The gray inside him churned. He looked up and down the empty, fog-shrouded beach. No one was coming. No one knew. A quiet, stubborn part of him, the part that had held Unji's hand until the very end, made the decision. He He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who couldn't leave someone to die alone. He put his phone away, bent into the cold pod, and carefully slid his arms under the alien woman. She was lighter than he expected. He lifted her out, cradling her against his chest. She was cold, so cold. He turned his back on the strange pod, now just a silent, dark hole in the sand, and began the slow, careful walk back up the path to his quiet, lonely house. The sea continued to crash against the rocks, erasing his footprints behind him. The spare room in Jay's house had been empty since his parents passed. It smelled of old paper and dust. Now it held an alien. He laid her on the narrow bed, unsure of what else to do. The glowing binders on her wrists and ankles had completely faded, leaving only faint, bracelet-like marks on her pale skin. She was still in that simple gray suit, which felt strangely dry despite the damp sea air. She was breathing, but each breath was shallow and slow. She was so cold. Jay stood in the doorway, his mind a storm of panic and disbelief. What did you give an injured alien? Water? Medicine? He had no idea. But he couldn't just stand there. He was a biologist. He understood life even if this life was from another star. Basic principles had to apply. Shelter. Warmth. He brought extra blankets from his own room, piling them over her carefully. He filled a hot water bottle, wrapped it in a towel, and placed it near her feet, not knowing if it would help. He wet a clean cloth with warm water and gently wiped the sand from her face. Her skin was smooth, almost cool like stone. Up close, the starry depth of her eyes, now closed, was less terrifying. It was strangely beautiful. He pulled a chair into the room and sat, watching her. The silence of the house, usually a heavy blanket of grief, now felt charged and waiting. His eyes kept drifting to the window, half expecting black helicopters or strange lights to descend. Hours passed. The gray afternoon light began to fade. Her fingers twitched first. A small, fluttering movement. Jay leaned forward, his heart pounding. Her eyelids, delicate and pale, trembled. They opened. Those star-filled eyes were unfocused at first, swimming with confusion. They scanned the plain ceiling, the old lamp, the faded curtains. Then they turned and found Jay, sitting stiffly in his wooden chair. Again that look. The same overwhelming recognition and relief from the beach flooded back into her expression. It was so strong, so sure, that for a dizzying second, Jay doubted his own memory. Had he met her before and forgotten? "You are here," she whispered, her voice a dry rustle. "You stayed. I brought you to my home," Jay said slowly, keeping his voice soft. "You were hurt. On the beach." She tried to push herself up on her elbows but fell back weakly. The binding, the exile. It was cold. So long. "I knew you would come." She spoke Korean with a formality, an old-fashioned rhythm that was unsettling. "My name is Jay," he said, hoping to ground the conversation in something real. "What is your name?" She looked at him as if he had asked what water was. "You know my name," she said, a small line of confusion appearing between her brows. "I don't. I found you. In a pod. On the shore." Her certainty wavered. She stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time. His worn sweater, his tired human face, the fear he couldn't hide. The profound relief in her eyes began to mix with doubt. "But the resonance. It is you. The promise was made to you." Jay shook his head gently. "I made no promise. I've never seen you before today." The alien woman. Kayla. A name floated into his mind from nowhere, and it felt right. Closed her eyes. A single luminous tear, like liquid pearl, escaped. The song is similar, but the notes are wrong. She seemed to be listening to something he could not hear. "I have made an error. A grave error." The words were filled with a sorrow that seemed centuries deep. Before Jay could ask what she meant, a violent shiver racked her body. The brief moment of clarity vanished. Her eyes rolled back, and she fell into a restless, trembling unconsciousness. Panic returned. She was sick or dying. He needed help, but who could he call? Not a hospital. Not the police. There was only one person. His sister, Sumi. He went to the living room, his hands shaking as he picked up his phone. He called her. Appa. Sumi's voice was bright, concerned. Is everything okay? Sumi, Jay said, his voice tight. I need your help. I need medical supplies, antibiotics, painkillers, bandages, the strong stuff. A pause. Jay, what happened? Are you hurt? It's not for me. Then who is it for? Her tone shifted to her journalist's voice, sharp and probing. I can't explain. Not on the phone. Please, just bring the things. Don't tell anyone. And come alone. He sounded desperate even to himself. Another longer pause. He could almost hear her thinking. Jay, this is about Unji, isn't it? You're not thinking of doing something. No, nothing like that. Someone else. Someone who needs help and has nowhere else to go. Please, Sumi. He heard her sigh, a sound of surrender and worry. Okay, I'll get some things from the clinic. I'll be there in an hour. But you have a lot of explaining to do. He ended the call and leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. An hour. He had an hour before his pragmatic, questioning sister arrived and saw the impossible shivering in his spare bed. He walked back to the doorway. Kayla was murmuring in her sleep, the words in a language that flowed like water over stones. The room felt colder than the rest of the house. He looked at her, this lost, bound woman who thought he was someone else. He was in far deeper water than the sea outside, and he was sinking fast. Sumi arrived exactly 1 hour later. Jay heard her car on the gravel and met her at the front door, blocking the entrance. She held a small pharmacy bag and a look of deep suspicion. Move, Appa, she said, pushing past him. You look terrible. Who is this person? Is she hiding from someone? Is that it? She pulled off her shoes, her eyes scanning the quiet living room. Wait, Sumi, Jay started. But she was already moving down the short hallway, drawn by the faint, strange light emanating from the spare room. She stopped in the doorway. Her breath hitched. The bag of medical supplies slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a rustle. Kayla was awake again, propped up weakly on the pillows. The strange, soft light seemed to come from her skin itself, a subtle glow that pushed back the room's shadows. Her starry eyes were fixed on Sumi, wide and curious. What? Sumi whispered, unable to finish the sentence. She turned to Jay, her face pale. What is this? This is Kayla, Jay said, the name feeling more certain now. She was on the beach. She's not human, Sumi stated, a journalist stating a fact. She took a step closer, not out of fear, but out of a need to understand. Her eyes. I am Kayla, the alien woman said softly, her voice still weak. You are his sibling. The resonance is similar, but fainter. A harmony, not the melody. Sumi blinked, then looked sharply at Jay. She speaks Korean? What is she talking about? Resonance? Melody? Jay shook his head, helpless. I don't know. She keeps saying I was supposed to return, that I made a promise. Sumi, ever practical, knelt and picked up the fallen medical bag. She approached the bed slowly. Are you injured? Can I look? Kayla watched her with an unnerving stillness. My body is repairing itself. The bindings drained my energy. The physical wounds are small. She gestured to a tear in her suit near her ribs. The fabric was stained with a dried, opalescent substance. Sumi, with gentle hands that were more clinical than Jay's, carefully examined the area. The skin beneath was smooth, with a faint, silvery scar already forming. Her blood. It's like oil and water mixed, Sumi murmured. She looked at Kayla. Where are you from? Kayla looked from Sumi to Jay, as if deciding something. From a place that watches, she said finally. We are observers. We study. We do not interfere. So you're a scientist? Jay asked. A recorder, Kayla corrected. Of life, of stories. My people believed your world was not ready for contact. We were to watch from the deep places, the empty spaces. But she looked down at her hands. I broke a rule. I was seen. Not by many. By one. What happened? Sumi asked, sitting on the edge of the chair Jay had used. I was young. My form was different. A shape for the deep ocean. I became trapped. A young one of your world found me. He freed me. He showed me a kindness that was not in our data. Her voice grew heavy with regret. I reacted. I formed a connection. A psychic imprint. Promise to remember. To return. This is the gravest crime for an observer. Cultural contamination. She looked directly at Jay, and the weight of her sadness filled the room. For this I was bound and exiled. Sent here in a stasis pod. To sleep on this world forever as my punishment. A life sentence of solitude. But you found me. You opened the pod. You saw me. The imprint on you. It called to me. It woke me. I thought the young one had returned, grown to fulfill his promise. The silence that followed was thick. Jay understood the words, but their meaning was too big. Interstellar law. Exile. Psychic imprints passed through families. You thought Jay was this boy? Sumi said. The resonance was so clear. The location. The shape of the compassion. But now I am awake. I hear the difference. The song is his, but the voice is not the same. I am sorry. I have brought you trouble. Just then, the old television in the living room, left on low volume, blared with a sudden news update. The three of them jumped. Continuing reports of unusual atmospheric phenomena over the Busan coast last night, said the announcer. Many residents described brief, synchronized green lights moving in formation before vanishing. Experts suggest it was likely a rare instance of ball lightning or military exercises. Sumi stood up and went to the door, looking toward the living room. Military exercises? She said quietly. She turned back to Jay. You said you found a pod. Where is it? Jay had been so focused on Kayla he hadn't thought about it. On the beach, below the cliff path. We need to make sure it's gone, Sumi said, her reporter's mind taking over. If anyone finds it, I will go, Jay said. No, Sumi said. You stay with her. I'll go. I'm less likely to be noticed. She grabbed her jacket. Lock the door. Don't let anyone in. After Sumi left, the house felt quieter than ever. Jay looked at Kayla. The people who bound you, your people. Will they come looking? Kayla's starry eyes seemed to dim. The exile was the punishment. They believe I am asleep forever. But the pod was breached. They may detect that, and others may have seen the pod come down. Your own people. A cold dread settled in Jay's stomach. He wasn't just hiding a lost woman. He was hiding evidence. Evidence that could bring two worlds crashing down on his small, quiet house by the sea. And this woman, this Kayla, looked at him not with the fear of a fugitive, but with the weary sadness of someone who had been truly, utterly alone for a very, very long time. Sumi returned an hour later, her face pale. She pulled Jay into the kitchen, away from Kayla. It's gone, she whispered. The tide must have taken it. There's just a smooth patch in the sand. But Jay, someone else has been there. What do you mean? Footprints, different shoes from ours, and a small, square impression in the sand, like someone set down a case or a piece of equipment. She ran a hand through her hair. Whoever it was, they were looking at the exact spot. A heavy silence fell between them. The quiet house no longer felt like a refuge. Felt like a cage with thin walls. The next morning, the knock came. It was firm and official. Through the window, Jay saw a man in a plain coat standing on his doorstep. He looked tired but thorough. Detective Park. Jay's heart hammered against his ribs. He motioned for Sumi to stay in the spare room with Kayla and closed the door tightly behind her. He opened the front door, trying to keep his face neutral. Jay? The detective asked, showing his badge. I'm Detective Park. Sorry to bother you. following up on reports of some unusual lights seen in this area a couple nights ago. Did you see anything? Jay shook his head. I was home. I didn't see any lights. It was technically true. He had been home after he carried Kayla inside. The detective's eyes scanned the living room behind Jay. You live here alone? Yes, since my wife passed. Detective Park's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry. His eyes kept moving. Mind if I come in? Just to have a look from your vantage point. The reports were quite specific to this part of the coast. Jay's mouth was dry. If he said no, it would look suspicious. Of course, he said, stepping aside. The detective walked in, his steps quiet. He didn't touch anything. He went to the large window overlooking the sea. You have a clear view, he commented. He then glanced down the hallway. Just the one bedroom? There's a spare room. I use it for storage, Jay said, the lie tasting sour. At that moment, a sound came from behind the spare room door. A soft, clear, musical tone. It was unlike any sound a human or an object would make. It was the sound of a drop of water falling in a silent cave, but it held a note. Detective Park's head turned sharply. What was that? Jay's mind went blank. An old radio. It turns on by itself sometimes. Very annoying. The detective looked at the door, then back at Jay. His kind, tired eyes were now alert and careful. He didn't believe him. He walked toward the hallway. Panic seized Jay. It's really just junk in there, he said, stepping to block the way. Detective Park stopped. He was not a large man, but he was solid. He looked at Jay, not with anger, but with a calm, professional intensity. Mr. Jay, I have to ask you to step aside. I just need to confirm the source of the sound for my report. The spare room door opened. Sumi stood there, looking flustered and holding her phone. Appa, I'm so sorry. That was my new message tone. It's so loud. She looked at the detective and gave a small, polite bow. Hello, officer. I'm Sumi, Jay's sister. I was just fetching some old photo albums he said were in here. A terrible time for my phone to go off. She played the role perfectly, the slightly embarrassed, normal young woman. Detective Park's stance relaxed a fraction. He peered past her into the room. Jay's blood ran cold. From his angle, he could see Kayla was not on the bed. She was curled on the floor behind the bed, completely hidden from view. I'm sorry for the trouble, Sumi said, stepping out and closing the door behind her. Is there anything else we can help with? Detective Park studied them both for a long moment. He nodded slowly. No, thank you for your time. If you do see anything unusual, please call. He handed Jay a card and left. They watched from the window as his unmarked car drove away. Neither of them moved until it was out of sight. Jay leaned against the wall, his legs weak. Sumi let out a shaking breath. They went back into the spare room. Kayla was sitting on the edge of the bed again. Her face was solemn. I am the danger, she said quietly. My presence is a disturbance. The man, he felt the wrongness. Not with his mind, but with his spirit. He is a careful hunter. It's not your fault, Jay said. But the words felt empty. The detective would be back. Or someone else would come. Kayla looked at him. Her starry eyes filled with a deep regret. You have asked who I thought you were. Now you must see who I am. To understand why I must leave. She held out her hand, palm up. On the table beside the bed, Jay's empty ceramic cup began to tremble. Then, without anything touching it, it lifted into the air. It floated steady between them. It wasn't a magic trick. It was a simple, quiet fact. Gravity did not apply to the cup when Kayla willed it so. She closed her hand, and the cup settled softly back onto the table. Outside the window, the sea had been churning under a gray sky. Kayla turned her gaze toward it. She raised her fingers slightly. Slowly, the rough, white-capped waves beyond the rocks began to calm. The water smoothed out, becoming as flat and still as a mirror for 100 meters before returning to its natural state. The universe is made of songs, Kayla whispered, her energy seeming to drain with the effort. I can hear them. I can suggest a new note. But here I am a wrong note. I must find my own song again. Far from here. Before my song destroys yours. Jay finally understood. This was not just about hiding a woman. He was harboring a being of profound power, lost and heartbroken, who believed her very existence was a threat to his world. And after the detective's visit, he was starting to fear she might be right. The fear in the house was a new kind. It was not the sharp panic of discovery, but a cold, steady dread. It sat with them at the kitchen table. Detective Park knew something was wrong. Kayla believed she was a danger. Jay felt trapped between a world that was closing in and a truth he still did not fully understand. He made tea, the simple action, a comfort. Sumi watched Kayla, who sat staring at her own hands as if they were foreign objects. "You have to tell us," Jay said, placing a cup in front of Kayla. She did not touch it. "You have to make me understand. Who was the boy? Why did you think it was me?" Kayla looked up. The deep sadness in her star-filled eyes was almost too much to bear. "You carry his shadow," she said, "not his soul. I was weak and hurt. I reached for the familiar song and found yours, which is so close it hurt my mind to tell the difference. I must show you. Then you will see, and you will know why I must go." She reached out, not for the cup, but for Jay's hand. Her fingers were cool. "May I?" she asked. "It is not an intrusion. It is a sharing, a memory." Jay, after a moment's hesitation, nodded. He was tired of being lost in the dark. Kayla placed her other hand on Sumi's arm, including her. "See with me," she whispered. The kitchen melted away. It was not like a dream. It was like stepping into a clear, perfect hologram. Jay and Sumi were there, but as ghosts. They stood on the same rocky beach below Jay's house. But the light was golden, the air warmer. It was decades ago. A small boy was playing alone at the edge of a tidal pool. He was maybe 7 or 8, wearing shorts too big for him. He had a kind, serious face. Jay's breath caught. He knew that face from faded black and white photos. It was his grandfather as a child. The boy was poking a stick gently at something trapped in a shallow pool. The thing was beautiful and strange. It looked like a large, translucent jellyfish, but its body held shifting colors, deep blues and silvers. It had long, delicate tendrils that were tangled in sharp, dry seaweed. It was struggling weakly, dying in the sun. The boy did not run. He did not poke it to hurt it. He dropped his stick and knelt in the wet sand. With incredible care, his small fingers began to untangle the slick, glistening tendrils from the rough weeds. He worked slowly, whispering quiet words of encouragement. "Almost. There you go, easy now." He freed the last tendril. The creature pulsed with a soft, grateful light. Instead of washing it out to sea with a rough push, the boy cupped his hands under the water and gently lifted the creature. He waded a few steps into the colder, deeper surf and lowered his hands. The creature, Kayla, drifted from his palms, shimmered once, and vanished beneath a small wave. The boy stood watching the empty water, a smile on his face. He had saved a life and it was enough. Then the memory shifted. It was not sight now, but feeling. As the young Kayla swam away, healed and full of wonder, she cast a thought back toward the shore. It was a pulse of profound gratitude, a bond formed in a silent moment of pure kindness. It was a promise, not in words, but in feeling. "I will remember you. I will return." The vision faded. Jay was back in his kitchen, Kayla's cool hand in his. Sumi was blinking away tears. "That was halabioji," Sumi whispered, using the Korean word for grandfather. Jay could only nod. He felt hollow and full at the same time. He knew that man, the gentle, quiet fisherman who had taught Jay the names of shells, who had always spoken softly to the sea. The man whose eyes had always seemed to be looking at something far away. "The imprint," Kayla said, pulling her hand back. The connection broken, she seemed smaller. It was a song of compassion. It attached to your family line. A quiet melody passed down. "You, Jay, carry it strongly. You grieve with the same quiet heart he had. You saved me with the same hands. When I was half dreaming in the pod, I heard your song and I thought the boy himself had come back. But it was his grandson. The pieces fell into place for Jay with a quiet, devastating click. It was not magic. It was not destiny. It was biology and grief and a family tendency to be gentle with lost things. He was not special. He was just the next note in a simple, kind melody. So the promise, Jay began, was to him, to that boy, and he lived his life, never hearing it. Kayla wrapped her arms around herself. My people were right. I contaminated an observation. I left a piece of myself behind. And now, because of that, you are in danger. The man who came here will return. Others will come. My own people, if they detect I am awake, will come to correct their mistake. What mistake? Sumi asked, her voice hard. Leaving me alive, Kayla said simply. Exile was meant to be a slow end. They will see my awakening as a failure. They will remove the problem. And they will remove anyone who has been contaminated by it. You! The cold dread in Jay's stomach turned to ice. He thought of Detective Park's careful eyes. He thought of lights in the sky. He looked at Kayla, not as an alien, but as a refugee his grandfather had once saved. A refugee who was now a target and who had made his family a target too. He was not a hero. He was a tired, sad man. But he was his grandfather's grandson. And his grandfather had not left a living thing to die. Then we hide you, Jay said, his voice firmer than he felt. And then we find a way for you to leave. Not to an exile pod, but somewhere safe. Kayla looked at him, and for the first time, the ancient sorrow in her eyes was mixed with a fragile, desperate hope. She had finally been seen for who she was, not who they thought she was. And the grandson of the boy who saved her was making a new promise. They had two problems, the human authorities and the alien ones. Sumi said they couldn't fight either. They had to disappear. The harbor, Sumi said. She was looking at a map on her phone. The old piers where the fishing warehouses are. It's a maze. Half of it is abandoned. If anyone is looking, they'll watch the roads, the beaches. They won't think to look in the middle of the port. It's not safe for long, Jay said. It doesn't need to be long, Kayla said softly. She was sitting by the window watching the twilight sea. The universe is not empty. There are other travelers. Not my people. Others. Traders. Nomads. They pass through the solar system's outer dark. If I can send a signal, a specific song, one of them may hear. They may answer. How? Jay asked. The pod had a beacon. Small. I took it. She opened her hand. In her palm was a smooth, dark stone about the size of a coin. It seemed to drink the light from the room. It is inert now. It needs to be activated from a high place, near the water. The old lighthouse at the end of the commercial pier. It is quiet there now. It was a desperate plan. But it was the only one they had. They waited for full dark. Jay gave Kayla an old dark jacket and a hat to hide her silver hair. She looked strange, like someone in a bad disguise, but it would have to do. Sumi left first in her car, turning on her headlights and driving slowly toward town. A simple distraction. If anyone was watching, they would follow the car. 10 minutes later, Jay and Kayla slipped out the back door. They moved through the narrow, dark paths between the seaside houses, away from the road. The air was cold and smelled of salt and fish. Kayla moved quietly beside him, her steps sure and silent. They reached the edge of the industrial port. It was a world of shadows and giant, silent shapes. Fishing boats, cranes, warehouses with broken windows. The noise of the city was a distant hum. They ducked behind stacks of rusting containers as a security car's lights swept past, its engine loud in the quiet. Jay's heart was a drum in his chest. This was not him. He was a man who studied plankton, not a man who hid in shadows. He glanced at Kayla. Her face was calm, but her starry eyes were wide, taking in every detail. She was a recorder even now. They reached the old wooden piers. The planks were slick and rotten in places. They stuck to the deeper shadows of the warehouse walls. Once they heard voices and froze. Two dockworkers on a smoke break, talking about a football game. They passed by unaware. The old lighthouse was not a real lighthouse anymore. It was a short, stubby tower with a dead light on top, used now as a weather station. It stood at the very end of a long, empty pier. "This is the place," Kayla whispered. They started down the long pier. It felt exposed, a narrow road over black water. Halfway down, headlights cut across the port entrance behind them. Car stopped. Doors opened and closed. Jay didn't look back. "Quickly," he said. They reached the base of the lighthouse. The door was locked with a heavy chain. Kayla placed her hand on the padlock. She closed her eyes. A soft, humming sound came from her, so low Jay felt it in his teeth. The metal of the lock glowed a faint blue for a second, then clicked open. Inside, it was dark and smelled of rust and old oil. A metal staircase spiraled up. They climbed. At the top was a small circular room with windows all around. The remains of old machinery sat unused. Kayla went to the window facing the open sea. She placed the dark stone against the glass. She closed her eyes and began to hum again. This time, it was a complex series of notes, a lonely, beautiful song that seemed to vibrate the air. The stone began to glow from within, a soft, pulsing green light. Outside, Jay saw flashlights bobbing at the far end of the pier. 2, maybe 3 figures. They were coming. "The signal is sent," Kayla said, opening her eyes. The stone went dark. "Now we wait, but they will not come here. It is not safe. If they answer, they will show a sign in a lonely place." The footsteps on the wooden pier were loud now. They were out of time. "There's a service ladder on the outside," Jay said, pointing to a hatch in the floor. "It goes down to the water, to the pier's support pillars." They slid through the hatch. The metal ladder was cold and slippery. Below them, the black water slapped against the thick wooden pillars of the pier. They climbed down into the forest of pillars, hidden in the absolute dark between the pier and the water. Above, they heard boots enter the lighthouse room. A beam of flashlight cut through the hatch above their heads. "Nothing," a voice said. It was Detective Park. He sounded tired. "But someone was here. The lock is broken. From the inside." Jay held his breath. Kayla was perfectly still beside him, her eyes fixed on the patch of night sky visible between the planks above. The flashlight swept around, then faded. The footsteps retreated back down the pier. Jay let out a shaking breath. They were safe for a few more minutes. Kayla was not looking at the pier. She was looking out to sea. She touched Jay's arm and pointed. Far out on the dark horizon, where the sky met the water, a single small light flashed. Not green or red like a ship. It was pure white. It flashed once, twice, 3 times in a precise rhythm. Then it vanished. "It is an answer," Kayla whispered, a tremor of hope in her voice. "A neutral ship. They will wait at a place of my choosing. A lonely point of land. Before dawn." Jay looked from that empty spot on the horizon back to the retreating flashlights on the pier. The next move was the last move. They had to get to a lonely point of land with everyone looking for them. They hid among the pillars until the port was silent again. The water was cold and the air was colder. Kayla pointed southeast, along the rocky coast away from the town. "There," she said, "the headland, where the cliffs are steep and no homes are." Jay knew the place. It was a 30-minute walk over difficult terrain. It was perfect because no one would be there before dawn. They moved like ghosts along the shoreline, staying off the paths. Kayla's strength was returning, and she moved over the slick rocks with a grace that was not human. Jay followed, his body tired but his mind clear for the first time in months. He was not thinking of the past anymore. He was thinking only of the next step, the next handhold. The headland was a bare fist of rock pushing into the sea. They climbed the last steep path as the sky began to lighten from black to deep gray. At the top, the wind whipped at them, smelling of nothing but ocean and sky. Kayla stood at the very edge, looking out. The first faint line of pink touched the horizon. She seemed to be listening. "It is here," she said. She turned to Jay. Her silver hair was free of the hat now, flying in the wind. In the dim light, Her star-filled eyes were soft. They are waiting just beyond the sight of your world. Jay suddenly felt the weight of the moment. This was it. The end of the strange, terrifying week. The end of her presence in his life. He had no words. What do you say to a being you saved, who thought you were your own grandfather? Sumi will be worried, he finally said, a simple, human thing. Your sister is strong. She will know you are safe. Kayla took a step closer. Jay, I was wrong when I first spoke. But I was not wrong about you. You did return. Not as the boy, but as the man his kindness shaped. You returned that compassion to me. You gave me back my life when I was bound and lost. Your family's song is a quiet, brilliant one in a universe that can be very dark. From her suit, she pulled out the small, dark stone, the beacon. She pressed it into his hand. It was warm. This is for you. It is a recorder. Can hold the sound of this sea, this wind. And it can send one message, one small song into the dark. If you ever need to, if you ever just want to say that you are here. Jay closed his fingers around it. He nodded, unable to speak. A shimmer began in the air above the water, 100 meters out. It was like heat rising from asphalt, but in the cool dawn. The air twisted, and a shape appeared. It was not a grand starship. It was a simple, smooth vessel, the color of tarnished silver. It was small, no bigger than a fishing boat. It hovered silently just above the waves. An opening appeared in its side, with a soft yellow light spilling out. It is time, Kayla said. She reached out and touched his cheek. Her hand was cool, but the touch was filled with a warmth that was not temperature. It was a feeling of gratitude, of connection, of a promise kept across generations. He felt his own grief, his loneliness, and for a second, it was not gone, but it was shared. It was understood by something ancient and kind. Goodbye, Jay. She turned and walked to the very edge of the cliff. Then she stepped off. Jay's heart lurched, but she did not fall. She walked, her feet pressing down on the air as if it were solid ground. She walked across the empty space between the cliff and the ship, over the crashing waves below. The wind tugged at her gray clothes. She did not look back. She reached the opening and stepped inside. The door flowed shut. The ship shimmered once, like a miracle, and then it was simply gone. The space where it had been held only the cold pink dawn and the endless sea. Jay stood there for a long time, until the sun fully broke the horizon, painting the water in gold. He was alone. The wind was just the wind again. He walked slowly back to his house. Sumi was waiting on the doorstep, her face drawn with worry. She saw him, saw the emptiness beside him, and her shoulders slumped in relief and sadness. Did she make it? Sumi asked. Jay nodded. He showed her the warm, dark stone in his hand. She left this. They went inside. The house was quiet. The spare room was empty, the blankets neatly folded. It was just his house again, just his grief, his quiet life. But it did not feel the same. That evening, Jay went down to the beach. He sat on the rock where his grandfather had once saved a strange, beautiful creature. He held the stone in his palm. He thought of Kayla, traveling through the dark. He thought of his grandfather, who had died an old man, never knowing the chain of events he had started with one simple act. He pressed the stone and, remembering what Kayla said about songs, he hummed a single, steady note into it, a note of being here, of being alive. He threw the stone into the sea. It vanished under a wave. He was not a hero. He was just a man, but he had helped a lost soul find its way home. And in doing so, the gray world he had been living in had gained a new color. Not a bright one, but a deep, gentle blue, like the sea under a quiet sky. He looked at the waves and did not feel so alone. The universe was vast and strange, but somewhere in it, a friend was listening.